It totally changes everything. We start to think about potentially how we have conductors and semiconductors in our body in the form of some of these like molecules like melatonin. We are interpreting different fields in our brains.
Is actually behaving in a quantum way.
A lot of chronic illness or burnout or any of those things that we see, it's not due to a lack of supplements. It's due to the...
All right, welcome back to Whole Grain Wisdom. Today we're speaking with Sarah. And what a lovely pleasure. You just traveled to India. How's it going over there?
Yes, fabulous. Yes, love it here. So yes, I'm very fortunate.
I'm super excited of this conversation because you are one of the few that was able to introduce me properly to connecting the dots between the ancient wisdom part and the science. So I really excited to share this wisdom and share this knowledge to the audience as well. Want to make a quick intro for anyone of the probably few that still don't know you. You're a researcher, educator in quantum biology and the gut-brain connection. Love that. Eventually we may touch a little bit on this. You hold a postgraduate degree in clinical neuroscience and 2 degrees psychological sciences and nutritional medicine. So, plus, by the way, also completed recently a diploma in photobiomodulation. I guess there couldn't be like a better, certification set for setting up the level of this conversation. I love it. Welcome to Whole Grain Wisdom, where we are bridging ancient wisdom and science, as I mentioned, to finally reveal that they're actually the same fundamental truth, just expressed in different languages. And just to kick off the conversation, I listened to a bunch of your work and I follow you since long. And I believe you have a very compelling picture to tell us what the heck are we even talking about? Because for anyone that is not, super deep into the quantum world, super nerdy as we are, what are we doing here? Like, what is even the keyword of the forgotten science of light? I leave you the floor. Get us into this world.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's so interesting that kind of that this terminology, photobiomodulation, and we're kind of treating it like a new science. But of course, this information isn't new. We already had, heliotherapy. We already, even in the 1940s, Nobel Prizes were given for kind of work in gathering this stuff. So ancient all the way through to fairly modern times. Then I think really what happened with the advent of antibiotics, we went down a drug route. Light was kind of demoted to being something that, potentially you might use on jaundiced babies or maybe vitamin D. And now we find ourselves in this revolution where people are rediscovering light therapy. So you're right. It's not a discovery. This is a rediscovery of ancient knowledge. I think, in Egyptian hieroglyphs, in ancient caves, you'll see people using light as medicine. We just need to relearn that. And now with kind of modern science techniques, we can discover the mechanisms, which is very exciting. But really the application is the same. We're using light as a medicine to heal people directly. And now we're doing it in different ways. We have different devices and things. Of course, people can also utilize the sun. That's the OG red light therapy device or any kind of light therapy device. But yes, you're right. I'm very interested in this whole connection between ancient wisdom and now trying to bring that up to date and seeing how we're applying it in modern technologies.
When we did our prep call, you told me something like immediately straightforward. We're beings of light. And to be honest, I would not have expected this straightforwardness from a scientist, because I would have expected, I live in Bali. I would have expected from some people in Ubud, but how do you describe this? How do you get the science-backed data on all of this that we do know since thousands of years, but until we literally connected the dots with the quantum part, it seemed that it didn't really make sense.
That's right. And actually, I think that I'm really only making that statement now because up to kind of all my education in biology, I kind of understood that statement on maybe a level that was more metaphor, we're beings of light. But actually, when you start to really dig into the quantum biology and the physics of light, you understand that, oh no, this isn't just a metaphor. We really are made of light. Our body is a combination of light and how it interacts with water. We're much more electricity than we currently think of. And we can think of ourselves almost as like slowed down light. We are actually light that's condensed into this kind of physical form, maybe, coalescing around certain informational structures to give us, the pattern that we currently call our bodies. So yeah, this is something that I've been getting into recently, like really trying to understand what is this quantum biology piece and how can we really fit this into our understanding of biology, because it totally changes everything. If we start to think of ourselves as light, we start to think about potentially how we have conductors and semiconductors in our body in the form of some of these like molecules like melatonin, how that interacts with water. There's so much information now about how light structures water, how light and water interact. And if you think about, we're overwhelmingly water molecules in our body. We're probably 70%, give or take, roughly water, but we are also overwhelmingly water molecules in our body. So the effect that light has this amazing effect on water should kind of lead us to look a lot more, I think, about this kind of physical property that we have of the body, and maybe not so much focus on the biology kind of lock and key, reductionist mechanistic way of looking at the body. We are not just animated machines. We are very much like energetic frequency, light, how, light and water combinations. That's really how our bodies are working. So I think, yeah, you're right. This is something that ancient civilizations have kind of told us. You and I are in these more Eastern countries right now where they have a long tradition of this. But now I think, even in Western medicine, we're starting to look at, okay, if light structures water, what effect does that have on the body? And how can we utilize these more physical properties rather than the biochemical properties of things like, light and how it interacts with our cellular mechanisms?
Yeah, definitely. And the next step would be going into the energy crisis of what we're living. But before we get there, I'm curious, for any layman out there that maybe got a little bit triggered and interested into biohacking and how to optimize your biology, getting supplements, all of the chemical things to get better and keep working more and more. What are we missing if we do miss something in all of that picture? And what would be like the very easy steps to kind of like reframe and refocus a little bit the narrative on there?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're kind of sometimes in the biohacking world, we're swapping one kind of mechanistic reductionist worldview, which is kind of the pharmaceutical model, for another one, which is slightly less toxic, perhaps, but still the same mechanism. And you're right. The aim is to kind of push the body to do more and to kind of use, like you say, nootropics and maybe supplements to kind of like force the body into this kind of let's just treat the body like a machine, fix the little bits that need fixing, and then just push through. And I think now we're starting to look more at, okay, how can we maybe pull back from that a bit and think about not how we can kind of manipulate the body, but how we can get the body more in tune with our natural surroundings and our environment so that the body is kind of functioning optimally. And it doesn't necessarily mean pushing through either. It means things like respecting your circadian biology. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting up with sunrise? Are you actually seeing light during your day? Because although
you're getting outside of your room itself.
Are you outside? Because really our bodies, when you think, human evolution is probably about 200,000 years. And yet for a couple of hundred, small fraction of that time of human evolution, we've led these indoor lifestyles. So our bodies really haven't caught up with that. Our bodies really are very much in tune with natural cycles. So sunrise, as you know, it's predominantly red light. That triggers a whole cascade of reactions that set our bodies up for what's to happen in the middle of the day. Then in the middle of the day, we see a different light spectrum, and that then initiates different hormones and things. That sets us up for the things we need to do in the middle of the day, foraging, all of those things, looking for mates, making a nest, all that stuff that mammals, like diurnal mammals who are used to day and night cycles, do. And in the evening, the same thing. The sun goes down, it switches on all of our hormones to help us to sleep, to flush our brains, to kind of consolidate memories, all those things that we need to do to prepare for the next day. So I think a lot of chronic illness or burnout or any of those things that we see, it's not due to a lack of supplements. It's due to the fact that we're not respecting our circadian biology. And really, it's very simple. What we need to do is live more in tune with nature, see sunrise, get outside. If it means you have to do your meetings outside, so be it. You know, I think most of us now can do meetings on the phone and sit outside. And then, you know, make sure you're getting enough sleep and go to sleep at a certain time. Because I think this kind of whole idea of like pushing through is a little bit outdated now. Everybody understands the need to recover and repair and spend that time. So I think really it's just an education thing. I think a lot of people, especially, we were going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, especially those kind of people that are kind of trying to operate on a higher level. Perhaps those people need it just as much as people who are maybe suffering from illness and also need to heal. We need to kind of understand that just because you're not suffering from a condition doesn't mean that you can kind of keep pushing through and not respect your biology and not take the rest and not get outside and not be in nature. So I think that's coming through from the research. And of course, it's something that all of these ancient cultures already had as a practice.
Yeah. So actually, before this video is going to go live, there will be another one on Holcomb Wisdom that it goes. I bring users all the way from the traditional habit loop creation mechanism and then going into understanding the conscious and the subconscious and what drives actually our habits, which is 97% subconscious. And then from there, going to understand what are the actual things that drag us against getting towards our goal. So this is definitely one of the things, circadian rhythms, getting out of balance itself. So when we talk about the energy crisis and in general, this overall discussion of hustling, burnout, mental health, whatever it is, everybody has his own, kind of different nuance on how bad the situation is. But I guess definitely it's pretty bad, and we are slowly awakening to this. So I'm spending my whole day working in front of a PC, artificial lighting, and then I maybe if I still have enough energy, I may put in a workout in an indoor gym with artificial lighting again, and most probably artificial air conditioning and flow. So what is wrong with that? What does it actually cause us, like from a biological perspective? How can we start to do things differently? And especially for the people that not necessarily can spend their days outdoor working because of the weather, the season, whatever, like what are things that can actually be done?
Yeah, I think you're right. This is the common perception, and we're kind of on this kind of rat race a little bit of kind of working in that way. But when you think about your body more in terms of electricity, maybe, how can you change? And you think of electrons as the flow of electricity, how can you get more electrons into your body? Well, one of the ways is something very simple like grounding, actually standing on the ground. Now, this isn't some kind of woo-woo tree hugger thing. This is, science. You are actually getting electrons coming up through the ground. This changes the redox potential. So if people from their school might remember reduction and oxidation reactions. This is to do with electron flow in the body. So we need to start thinking of the body more in terms of these kind of reduction and oxidation, getting electrons into the body. So then it becomes more like grounding, being outside, seeing sunlight, making sure you're taking a break from blue screens and all of the technology. I mean, I think if we could see Wi-Fi and everything in our houses or in our places of work, that would help a lot. It's because these things are out of our kind of visible sight. We just don't realize how we're being exposed, flickering lights, constant Wi-Fi. Like you say, you go to the gym, like booming sound, constant Wi-Fi, you're surrounded by screens and blue lights. It's very, very stressful to the body and very, very draining. So instead of kind of charging your battery, if you think of the body as a battery, you're draining it constantly. And this kind of eats away, daily. If you keep doing these things, that's what leads to this kind of total loss of energy. And eventually it leads to burnout, and eventually it leads to chronic ill health. So bringing that back to thinking of the body more as a battery where you need to put in electrons, then hopefully takes people back to an understanding of, okay, what do I need to do that? If you genuinely can't get outside, you can stand on a grounding mat. There are hacks. That's why it's biohacking. So you can buy a grounding mat. You can sleep on a grounding sheet. You can almost everybody can get outside for at least an hour a day, even if you're just kind of in an apartment and you have to sit on a balcony, stick your head out the window, whatever you need to do, you can get that natural light into your eyes. Things like red light devices. That's really why I made these red light devices, because what you're doing there is nothing unnatural. You're also just substituting those wavelengths of light. If you think of us as a species, we're incredibly deficient in some wavelengths, particularly the ones we normally see at sunrise and sunset, because we just don't get out to see them. And I see that to me, it's like when, explorers used to go out to these countries and they used to get scurvy and no one knew why. And then we found out, it's because they're not having vitamin C. Let's send them off with a load of lemons and then, people don't get so ill. We're in that situation now where we have these deficiencies of light wavelengths, but we just don't realize. And the simple fix is to substitute them if you genuinely can't get out at sunrise and sunset. So things like red light therapy devices. So grounding mats, red light therapy devices can be a good substitute. But of course, the best thing, I can see there you are in your lovely work environment with the light waves coming in. I mean, if you can do that, that's obviously the best way to do things. And I think a lot of people like yourself, a lot of these biohackers are kind of living evidence of that. You can see how much healthier you feel when you start to respect that circadian piece. So I think for a lot of people who struggle and think this is maybe the science isn't there, try it for a few months. Try doing this thing where you go outside and you stand on the ground and you see sunlight every day, and you can really feel the difference. But I think, for those people who can't or won't, we have the technology to enable you to at least respect that kind of electrical side of your body's nature.
I still remember a little bit around a year ago when I went full on nomadic life. And the first place where we've been living with my wife was Tenerife in the Canary Islands. And summer was already almost ending in normal, let's say, Central Europe. But then when we got there, we kind of got an extended version. But I still had all of the beautiful baggage from the summer in Europe. And spending the same amount of hours working on the PC, I never had a single headache at the end of the day. I was working outdoor and I was just like gazing at the view outside. And after that, then we went in Bangkok, where, yes, it was still tropical weather, but it was so polluted that we had to stay literally a month in the Airbnb with the AC and so on. And I immediately felt so bad. So I also invite people to kind of like do these tests for yourself, because you don't really understand the difference until you get way, way better. And unfortunately, for some reason, the universe is weird, because when you get way, way better, it takes some time. It's quite slow. But then when you go back to the previous situation, it's fast. So that's where really you see the difference, right? Instead of the positive one, you see the negative. Yeah. Lovely. So I want to try to dig a little bit into a more strange topic for maybe some people, right? We were discussing in the prep call, we can connect the dots also with some more consciousness and kind of like higher kind of narrative. What is your current view on all of this, from understanding, starting from the chemical parts and then going into energetics and then physics? How is it making sense for you so far?
So the consciousness piece is really interesting to me. And it's something that I try and spend a fair amount of my time thinking about. And I attend a lot of meetings on this. But the more you think about light, for example, they say light is a wave and a particle. But the more you think about that, and so how could that actually be working? And if you think about field physics makes the most sense. So light is a field. And then if you think, okay, how might we be interacting with a field? Well, it's possible that consciousness is a field that we're able to kind of interact with in some way, potentially we're receiving the field, or our brains are some way like channels for the field. There's lots of different theories of how we are actually experiencing consciousness. For me, it makes most sense to think that it is some kind of field, possibly some kind of field that contains light, because we know that in our brains that there are certain receivers of light, which is the mitochondria, but there are also certain structures in the brain, like the tubulin, like DNA, which also react to light in a specific way. And there's lots of really interesting studies right now looking to see, okay, how might this radiance or how might these fields of light be set up in the brain? And could this be some kind of interaction between potentially a field of consciousness and then our direct experience? So for me, this is very plausible and something that I kind of look at most often. And I'm very much into this research on how consciousness could be our interaction with some kind of field. But regardless of where you go with that, it's very, very clear, ancient cultures, when you think about consciousness, don't they always put like a halo around people? Or here I am in India, they always have them as beings of light. I think this is definitely something where we can bring some of that ancient knowledge up to date and start to look at what is consciousness. And then also start to bring in some of these other things, how are we actually actively thinking about these? Are we setting aside some of our time of day to actually think about these bigger questions? And when we do, you can't help but understand some of these more interesting learnings about quantum physics in terms of consciousness. So I think that we will find that potentially fields of light have a big role to play in consciousness and how our brains are then interacting with those fields. I don't want to kind of say I know exactly how it's working, but I think the research into that is most compelling to me. And it's very interesting how the brain responds to light in that way, in that potentially, because we know if we shine light onto the brain, we only get onto a tiny surface of the brain, and yet we experience these global effects. Certainly we can measure global effects, MRI, EEG, also subjectively we have global effects. So somehow the light is propagating in the brain. If we bring in kind of quantum biology and look at, okay, maybe tubulin is a kind of one of these molecules that could potentially be changing its structure depending on spin states relating to quantum physics, that could explain in some extent how we are interpreting different fields in our brains using these structures, but mainly it's how they relate to light is how these structures are working in the brain. So again, I think from a point of view of the growing physics of consciousness science, because again, it's a fairly new science. We haven't been thinking about it that long, but light is certainly playing a role there. And certainly the lead researchers in this field are very much looking at how light interacts with things like microtubules or DNA or other light sensitive molecules in the brain.
What I loved about this very same topic, I was recently reading a book on quantum biology, and at the very, very end, kind of like speculative, like this, we still need to do a little bit of work on there, but the hydrogen atom connecting the different pieces of the DNA and being actually the one responsible for whether there is or not a flip and a mutation, therefore, is actually behaving in a quantum way. So we still wonder, I remember when I was younger that the current belief was you're born with your genes and you're stuck with that. And then slowly we started to understand about epigenetics, and we started to say, 20%, 30%, 50%, then 90%. If we are getting there with quantum physics and the DNA functioning as the actual transmutation as a function of quantum physics, then there is literally not even more 90%. It's just everything is just behaving in this way. It's so cool.
It's very interesting. And like I said, you're right. It was very much deterministic. And then they started to say, oh, well, there's a few caveats. Maybe photosynthesis is behaving in a way, maybe a magnetoreceptor in a bird's eye. Now we're starting to see, there seems to be a lot of these processes in the body. If you bring in quantum physics, it makes it so much easier to understand. And also the body is hugely, hugely energy efficient. And it can do that because it's utilizing these different mechanisms that you're talking about. So I think it's hugely exciting to think about that. And it's hugely exciting to think about, okay, could we potentially understand some of these things. We kind of separate out mind and matter, don't we? We kind of think, okay, this is to do with consciousness, this is to do with our biology. How can we merge those? It's looking more and more like that distinction is a little bit arbitrary, and in actual fact, there isn't that distinction. And so that, of course, is also hugely exciting for things like, these expressions of genes and different things like that, and how we can potentially change those expressions either through some kind of, like you say, conscious or intentional process, or via something else that's having an effect on these different mechanisms. So yeah, I'm totally with you. The more you kind of read about it, the more it opens up possibilities for what could be going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to close with this very last concept, because you're bringing me into something that I feel in quantum physics and in general quantum biology, and the new, probably like the forward thinkers among the biohackers are talking about, which is coherence. And I want to just close the conversation in a way where, first of all, for anyone that ever heard about the term coherence but didn't really quite get what the heck does it mean, can you bring us a little bit over there? And when we talk about coherence, what are the key coherent hacks that we can actually get done in our life that probably we didn't yet mention? You already talked about how to implement certain lifestyle habits, or maybe the different rooms and environments where we live in. Let's close up with a little bit of like an easy guide to live more coherently, if we can say so.
Yeah, coherence is a great thing to talk about. And I think it's playing a massive role in biology that, again, we're not really focusing on at the moment with current science. So to put it very simply, coherence is like something, if you have two waves that are moving together, they're called coherent if they're going at the same time. So if they're in phase. So, if the upward peak and the downward peak match. So something that's incoherent would be something, where your upward peak and your downward peak kind of are all out of alignment. So in a very simple wave terms, that's what coherence means. And if you think about that on a bigger picture, we have what's known as resonance. So I think most people have heard of resonance. When something's kind of discordant, it's all jangly. When it's resonant, it's incoherence. And that's because the frequencies are matching. You have this coherence, and then you have different resonance where you have like a matching of coherent things, let's just say, to kind of be very, very simplistic. And this is something that many biologists have suggested. In fact, one kind of a hero of mine, Dr. Mei-Wan Ho, she's written some fabulous books that I highly recommend for people, talking about how coherence in living organisms is a way that we have this energy efficiency. So I think this kind of whole thing about coherence or being in resonance, it's all to do with vibration, with frequency, which again comes back to light. So how can we live our lives so that we have more coherence, things that match more, things that are more in resonance? HeartMath also did some great stuff about coherence between the heart and the brainwaves. If the heart and the brainwaves are in sync, we have much more resilience. We have better interactions because it supports positive emotions. So when we talk about coherence, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about things kind of matching, being in alignment, as opposed to, disharmony in the body. So again, this brings us back to thinking more about our body in physical terms, thinking about vibration, thinking about frequency, thinking about potentially how we can use frequency medicine. I use wavelengths in my light, but I also use different pulsed frequencies, because we know the body responds to different frequencies, and this can set up some kind of resonance. So people may, go and hear singing bowls, and, their kind of body relaxes as they hear a sound that kind of puts them in that frequency. Or you can use flashing light, or you can use meditations that have that same kind of frequency. So there's a lot of things you can do to put your body more in resonance. Also, the earth is putting off its own frequency. When you're standing on the earth, you're not just getting electrons, you're actually picking up the vibrational frequency of the earth, which is around about 7.8 hertz, depending on where you are. It's slightly different in different places, which is why it's good to stand on the ground where you are, so your body can kind of get in tune with that. It's about getting in tune with your surroundings. So from my point of view,
the best way not to get the jet lag is immediately go ground yourself.
Immediately ground yourself so your body can feel that, the vibration of the earth. Then you're in coherence with where you're actually at. You don't want to kind of land somewhere and not only are you out of coherence with the time zone, but you're out of coherence coherence with your geographical location. That's exactly true.
Yeah, this would be yet another podcast, but lately I'm getting so much into the understanding of the frequency of the food that you eat.
Yes.
And how important, I come from the background of gastronomy. I did my bachelor at the University of Slow Food. So they were always talking about good, clean, and fair. And at the big, when I was there, of course, I didn't know the science behind. I knew that the good food without chemical, without pesticide was good. But now with the quantum physics understanding, I can understand that if you are eating a food that has been grown in another area of the planet, absorbing lights from the sun, that is literally another frequency, and you're eating all of that, then your body's like, wait a second, are we in Colombia eating bananas, or are we actually in Europe eating, cabbage during winter?
For sure. For sure, the food is absorbing biophotons that has information, and we get that information. You're totally correct. The whole thing about eating locally and eating seasonally, that's one of the ways that reflects in the body. So I'm totally with you. Where did I go? I went somewhere the other day and we were drinking Malbec wine from Argentina. And although I wasn't in Argentina at the time, we were saying, well, at least it's got, it's right up there. It's clean air. It's got a lot of biophotons. It's got a lot of altitude. You're getting that. So that was a little bit tongue in cheek. But I think really the food that you're eating, that informational, energetic component of it is actually very important. And that's something, we all know that we should eat locally and seasonally. Maybe people think, that's because we should be supporting local people. But the other side of it is our body recognizes that. And we want to give the body the right information that it knows. You're exactly right. Here I am in a tropical country, standing on the ground, eating these tropical fruits. When you're somewhere else, you need to respect that. And again, go out and earth in that country, eat the things that are local there, give your body the correct information so you have this coherence and resonance with where you're at.
I love that. Thanks so much, Sarah, for the lovely conversation. I hope anyone that was a little bit interested on the topic, but not yet experienced, let's say, could get like a overall understanding of what we are getting into with the overall, I would say, kind of like movement of scientific understanding on this. Where people can find you, how people can help you, what do you need from the community? Let's gather up all extra energy, also from the people collaborating at Whole Grain Wisdom.
That's lovely. Yes, I'm totally into that. I think, again, one of the things we didn't talk about is community. That's also a vibration. That's also a resonance, being with people who have the same we don't call it wavelength for nothing, being on the same wavelength. So I'm very happy to engage with anybody who's on my wavelength. Sarah at Sarah Thrive, spelled CERA, Sarah at sarahthrive.com, or all my socials are all Sarah Thrive or the Sarah System. So I'm very happy to connect with anyone, and just connecting with like-minded people would be an honor. So thank you.
For a second, I understood light-minded people.
That's great. Oh, I dropped you.
And yes, here we go. Yeah, too much energy.
Too much energy. Light-minded and like-minded. I'll take them all.
Love that. Well, thanks so much. And for anyone here still listening to us, this is Whole Grain Wisdom, where we are merging ancient wisdom and science so that we can finally connect the dots, understand, live better, be happy, love each other, whatever. Lovely.
Thank you so much.